Picture walking through a mist-covered forest on the edge of a forgotten mountain range in Europe, where the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient pine, and shadows dance beneath twisted branches. The sun barely breaks through the dense canopy, as if the very world hesitates to reveal its secrets. In the distance, there's a low, haunting chant, almost swallowed by the crackling of dry leaves and the murmurs of a hidden stream. You feel watched, but not by anything visible. This was the world once inhabited by the Ash folk, a nameless, elusive people who ruled the forgotten dark age of Europe. They were the lost warlords of a time when kingdoms rose and fell in whispers, when iron was fresh and magic still clung to every oak and stone. We have only fragments of their existence. A broken rune here, a shadowed tale there, and a few skeletal remains unearthed beneath layers of peat and ash. These beings once filled our oral stories, our fireside myths, but now their names are swallowed by time. They vanished like smoke on the wind, leaving behind questions heavier than the forests they once dominated. So, who were the Ash folk really? And why did their warlords disappear into the shadows, leaving Europe to forget? This might be the strangest thing about the Ash folk. They aren't just people or warriors as we imagine. No, they were something far older, almost elemental. Not brute conquerors clad in heavy armor, but masters of subtle power, keepers of a dark and wild wisdom that connected them to the very bones of the landscape. Some folktales whisper that these warlords could call storms, that they wove the ash of burnt forests into protective talismans, and that their voices were as compelling as the howling wind. And yet, what's most bewildering is that, while they ruled, there was no written record of their deeds. Their legacy survives only as the Ash warlords, mythic figures known only by the forests that bore their name and by the peasant stories that spoke of strange figures cloaked in ash-gray garb, faces smeared with soot, moving silently through twilight woodlands. In 9th century Bavaria, chroniclers referred to them not as lords or kings, but as shadow chiefs, mysterious beings who stirred unease without ever openly challenging emerging feudal kings. Some monks described fleeting sightings, hulking men with eyes glowing faintly orange, walking the blackened trees that survived great fires. Others believed these folk were ancient spirits bound to the remains of a burned world, their warlords neither alive nor dead, straddling the veil between man and myth. This should be no surprise, for the Ash folk represented a bridge between the raw forces of nature and the fragile order humans tried desperately to impose. Their very existence was like nature's version of security cameras, ever watchful guardians of the forests, warning of danger before it reached village gates. In this sense, the Ash warlords were the original environmental activists, protectors of woodlands that, if lost, meant famine, ruin, and despair. Without anyone quite understanding, people came to see these figures as both terrifying and necessary, a dark balancing force in uncertain times. But there's more to this story. The Ash folk came with their own code and customs, separate from the chivalric ideals we associate with medieval knights. Instead of castles or great halls, their meeting places were deep in the wilderness, in shadowy groves lit by flickering fires and the glow of mossy stones. There, the warlords judged disputes, shared secrets of herb and bone, and sang rites to calm restless spirits. The common folk called these gatherings the fires of ash, and some whispered that the warlords spoke in an ancient tongue, older than Latin or German, a language that carried the weight of the earth itself. Take a moment and imagine the sound of those gatherings. Low chants reverberating through gnarled trees, the crackling of fire mingling with the hoot of unseen owls, and the soft murmur of feet brushing over dry leaves. You can almost feel the weight of the warlord's presence as he steps forward, his ash-covered hands raised in solemn blessing, invoking the ghosts of old spirits to witness the pact being sealed. Folklorists have long wondered about the origin of these warlords and their lost culture, with scholars like Katharina Mainhardt exploring how their myths blend Celtic druidic echoes with the harsh realities of the early Dark Ages. It seems the Ash folk were an amalgamation, not quite fully human, not quite spirit, embodying the fading connection between mankind and the wild. What these tales really reveal is a world balanced on the edge, where humanity still lived in a tense dialogue with nature's unpredictable forces. One traditional story recorded in the 14th century by a Bavarian chronicler named Ulrich von Altenheim provides a rare glimpse into Ash folk life. It tells of a warlord named Hrodger Ashbrand, considered a hero both feared and revered. According to the tale, during a harsh winter when wolves threatened to devour entire villages, Hrodger led his band deep into the forest. He sang an ancient hymn, one taught to him by the Old Ones, the previous warlords whose spirits still lingered in the ash and smoke. As the story goes, "From the fire's heart we call you forth, wolves of shadow turn your course, ash and smoke, our shield tonight by ancient pact restore the light." The wolves, it was said, were driven away by a sudden gust of wind, as if the forest itself obeyed this ruler's command. The villagers believed that Hrodger was no mere mortal, but a guardian chosen by the spirits of the ash-blasted woods, and they left offerings at the forest's edge to keep his favor. This story illustrates much about the Ash folk's place in medieval society. They were not just warriors, but mediators between humans and the wild, a role akin to medieval social workers who managed conflicts both physical and spiritual. Their power was less about conquest and more about maintenance, preserving the fragile harmony between encroaching civilization and the untamed wilderness that threatened to reclaim it. Yet beneath this behavior lay darker truths. Some legends hint that the warlords demanded sacrifices, sometimes of livestock, occasionally of human life, to renew the pact with the forest spirits and maintain the ash's protective power. One chilling tale from the Black Forest speaks of a traveler who stumbled upon a secret ash folk ritual beneath an ancient ash tree blackened by fire. The traveler described masked figures dancing around a smoky bonfire, chanting unintelligible verses, and a whispered prophecy that ash must fall so life may grow. These were not heroes in a classic sense, but relentless keepers of a harsh order, demanding reverence through fear. This reveals something deeper about medieval Europe's psychological landscape: the need to balance hope with dread, control with awe. The Ash warlords embodied this tension, much like the grim yet necessary figures in other folklore, reminding villages to respect the natural world while acknowledging its terrifying power. They were nature's original boundary keepers, the embodiment of what happens when civilization turns its back on wildness. In our modern world, where sprawling cities blot out forests and wild creatures vanish under concrete and steel, the Ash folk's role has silently faded. We have replaced these guardians with police forces, environmental laws, and satellite monitoring, our new forms of security cameras who watch over the land. But these are cold, bureaucratic tools, lacking the mysticism and primal respect that the Ash warlords commanded. We no longer sing hymns to the forest or swear pacts in the flickering firelight. Instead, we bury ancient fears beneath layers of progress and routine. Still, the stories linger. In some corners of rural Bavaria, old women still whisper of Die Aschenwalk, the ash folk, warning children not to wander near ash trees when the moon is full. Grimm's collection, compiled in the 19th century, briefly mentions shadowy figures emerging from charred groves. Catherine Briggs, the eminent folklorist, speculated that these tales might be distant echoes of the Ash warlords' fading presence. But these apparitions are dismissed as superstition now, ghosts of a forgotten epoch, much like the warlords themselves. Yet imagining those times, the scent of smoke curling up from distant campfires, the distant growls of wolf packs, the flickering shadows cast by ash trees on cold stone walls, reminds us of a world where humanity's survival depended on respecting the immense power of nature's darker forces. It was a world where myth and reality coexisted in a precarious dance. As the long centuries passed, the warlords' power waned, challenged by the rise of feudal lords, the spread of Christianity, and the growing dominance of written law over oral tradition. The mystics and shamans who once advised these dark rulers were branded heretics. Their secret rites were outlawed, and their ancient language silenced. Europe moved into the bright light of medieval history, but with that light came the fading of the shadows where the Ash folk once thrived. Still, the ash remains, in the trees scorched by forgotten fires, in the soil thick with the remains of burned forests, and in the subtle cracks of folklore that survive among old tales and whispered warnings. In the shadows between worlds, the lost warlords linger as a reminder that the Dark Age was never really dark. It was a time of transformation, a cradle for the uneasy balance between civilization and the wild unknown. But the Ash Warlord was more than just a guardian or a specter of ancient woods. They were a symbol of a humanity that recognized its place not atop nature, but woven into its very essence. Their stories invite us to reconsider what we've lost in this march towards modernity: the sacred connection with the land, the dance with darkness and light, and the humility of standing in the ashes of the past, listening for the faint echo of forgotten songs. And in that echo lies a question we all face. When the ash settles, what new life might grow from the ashes? What ancient wisdom waits buried beneath our forgotten past, ready to guide us through our own uncertain age? We've lost something precious in forgetting the ash folk, something that might just teach us how to live more fully in a world still so fragile and wild. As we step deeper into the shadows of the ash folk's world, the forest seems to breathe with stories waiting to awaken. What happened when the towering warlords vanished, and why does their presence still haunt the edges of our memories? To understand this, we must unravel the final threads woven into the fabric of their existences, and glimpse how the lost warlords shaped the destiny of a Europe struggling to find its soul. The Ash Warlords were more than mere rulers or warriors. They were liminal guardians, standing at the crossroads of earth and spirit, life and death, order and chaos. This might be the strangest thing about the Ash folk. They were not defined by conquest or empire, but by an ancient covenant with the land itself, an unspoken contract carved in ash and smoke, a pact to protect the fragile balance of a world perpetually at risk of collapse. Their power was subtle, not born of steel and bloodlust, but woven from the enduring whispers of the forest, the crackle of dying embers, and the pulse of old spirits resting beneath scorched earth. To grasp the full mystery, let's return to a tale recorded in the 11th century by Benedictine monks chronicling the dense Bavarian woodlands. It tells of Lothar Greymantle, an ash warlord whose name flickered through village stories as both savior and specter. One bitter autumn, when famine stalked the land and whispers of witchcraft stirred fear in the villages, Lothar arrived silently at the edge of a desperate settlement, cloaked in ash-stained leather, his face darkened by soot and scars. He called neither for sword nor army, but for a meeting at the ancient grove known as the Heart of Ash. The villagers gathered hesitantly by firelight, the cold night wrapping around them like a shroud. Lothar raised his hands skyward and began to speak in that lost tongue, older than the Latin spoken in monasteries, a language that felt less like words and more like an invocation. From the bones of trees and fire's embrace, the old pact holds: break not the ash, lest shadows swell. As his voice grew, so did a low, resonant hum, as if the forest itself responded. Suddenly, branches snapped, eerie shapes twisted in the mist. Wolves howled far off, tilting their heads in uncertain harmony. Then from the fire, a spark leapt upward, quickly growing into a towering flame that seemed to push back the creeping cold and fear. The villagers, long paralyzed by despair, found their courage rekindled. Lothar's presence was a reminder that survival was possible if the deeper laws of nature were honored. No sword battles were fought that night. Instead, a pact was renewed, a pact not written in scrolls but sealed in ash, breath, and trust. This story reveals much about the Ash Warlords' role as custodians of resilience, their leadership rooted not in domination but in stewardship, a notion rarely spoken of in medieval chronicles but deeply etched into folk memory. They were, in many ways, the original social workers of their era, mediators who soothed human fear, resolved disputes rooted in scarcity, and maintained the fragile fabric that allowed communities to coexist with the threatening wild. But beneath the surface of this guardianship lay a darker, more unsettling truth. The Ash Warlords demanded a price for their protection, and the forest's favor was fickle and exacting. In the 13th century, the Black Forest region bore witness to a grim ritual recorded by wandering monks, whose parchments describe a secret assembly where masked figures cloaked in soot danced around a bonfire nestled beneath a charred ash tree. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of guttural chants in a language none but the ash folk understood. At the ritual's peak, the warlord raised an obsidian dagger, and a sacrifice was made, not always willingly, to appease the restless spirits said to dwell within the burned tree's roots. The monks wrote that the ash must fall so life may grow, but the cost was chilling. This was no romantic folk guardian. It was a shadowy force willing to support human survival only through fear, awe, and ruthless balance. The warlords embodied the harsh truth of a world where man still knelt before nature's terrible majesty, where survival demanded both reverence and sacrifice. Such tales allow us to peer into the medieval mind, a landscape where humanity's relationship with the environment was fraught with tension and respect. The Ash folk were the original boundary keepers, reminding fledgling villages that to challenge nature's rhythms was to invite ruin. They were watchers in the dark, the whisper in the wind that kept civilization's fragile light from being extinguished. Yet, with the rise of feudalism and the spread of Christianity, the power of the Ash warlords eroded. The church branded their rites heretical. Oral traditions were crushed beneath the weight of Latin sermons and written laws. Slowly, the ancient language fell silent. The fires of Ash gatherings were extinguished or driven underground, and the warlords became no more than shadows, ghost stories told to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But disappearing from records did not mean vanishing completely. Across Europe, echoes of the Ash folk persist in whispered superstitions, old customs, and persistent fears. In 16th century Bavaria, villagers reclaimed pieces of these lost traditions under the guise of harmless folk rituals, carrying burnt ash as protective charms, avoiding certain ash trees during harvests, and speaking of the watchful ones when describing shadowed paths. These survivors reveal how deeply the Ash warlord's legacy was embedded in daily life, long after historians had forgotten them. In the oldie world, these customs were a subtle defiance against the dawn of a sterile modernity, the last flickers of a worldview that honored mystery and wildness rather than control and mastery. The Ash folk remind us that in every fire burnt to clear the forest, something ancient perished, but from those ashes, life and memory might still find roots. Today, our society battles with environmental crises incomparable to those of the medieval Dark Ages. The loss of forests, species, and cultures reflects a disconnection from the very forces the Ash warlords once respected. We may no longer believe in warlords who summon the storm or speak in ancient tongues, but our modern security cameras, satellites, and laws struggle to replace the profound, ancestral understanding that the Ash folk possessed. Their stories are a call to reclaim a sacred relationship with the land, a recognition that humanity's fate remains intertwined with the shadowed woods and scorched earth beneath our feet. But what does it mean to reclaim this wisdom in an age saturated with science and technology? The key may lie in embracing a broader definition of knowledge, one that respects the seen and unseen, the measurable and the mysterious. Folklorists like Katharina Mainhart and Catherine Briggs have long argued that myths are not just stories. They are encoded memories, cultural therapies helping societies navigate fear and hope, the ancient therapy sessions that sustained communities. By listening to these stories anew, we can begin to perceive the echo of the Ash folks' teachings, their call to stewardship, humility, and harmony with the wild. Imagine standing once more beneath an ash tree smudged with soot, hearing the distant chant of warlords gathered in the heart of a timeless forest. Imagine their voices rising as firelight dances across faces painted in ash gray, invoking a pact with earth and sky. What wisdom might we find if we folded ourselves once again into their ancient ritual? What secrets about resilience, balance, and the cycles of destruction and renewal could transform our fractured modern lives? These lost warlords are more than relics of a forgotten dark age. They are symbols of an enduring human truth, that in the fragile dance between civilization and wilderness, we must listen to the whispers of ash and smoke, shadows and fire. They remind us that greatness does not lie solely in conquest and dominion, but in guardianship, respect, and sacred dialogue with the land. As the final embers of their story flicker, we are invited to consider, when the ash settles, what new life will bloom? What forgotten pact might we renew between ourselves and the earth? The Ash folk offer not only mystery, but a map back to a time when humanity stood closer to the breath of the wild, a time when darkness and light forged a lasting harmony. So, as you walk through the forests of today, pause and listen for the faint rustle of leaves, the hidden voices beneath cracked bark, and the lingering scent of smoke carried on the wind. In these whispers lives the legacy of the lost warlords, the masters of a forgotten Europe, whose dark age was not merely an era of despair, but a crucible of transformation, a story still waiting to be told. Let us carry their songs forward, preserving these tales not as mere curiosities, but as living wisdom, reminders that even in the darkest times, amid the ashes of what was lost, the seeds of new life and understanding lie quietly waiting to be sown.